Yo kids, it's Libby. Today on the Bard Book Club, no more pussyfooting around, it's Hamlet. In case you missed it, earlier this month I did a whole week called Solila Week, where I spent one day talking about each of Hamlet's 7 soliloquies, which means they aren't really going to be featured in this video, except as how they relate to like broader thematic concepts. So I highly suggest that you go check out those videos if you want to get the full picture of this play. This play is a very exciting one for me because Hamlet is the only play that I can really say I have formally studied in an academic context. I studied no Shakespeare in college. I don't think I even studied any English language literature. And in high school, my first 2 years of English classes were like not really about literary analysis. They weren't very good. So I did read several Shakespeare plays, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, Romeo and Juliet, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. But what we were doing with them is basically just like know what happens in these plays, and we weren't really thinking complexly about them. Junior year I did no Shakespeare, and senior year I did Hamlet. So you might think that would make it easier for me to talk about. I think it actually makes it harder because I don't really know where to pitch things because I'm used to talking to people about Hamlet who have read the play very recently and know generally people who have it in front of them and know each scene very well and know I can just reference one line and they'll know approximately what I'm talking about. So if this is confusing, I'm sorry. You may want to have a copy of the text with you, potentially a searchable copy of the text, so you can figure out where I am. So Hamlet is a very big play. And at the moment in our cultural sphere, we are in what I would call a Hamlet age. There are Hamlet ages and there are Lear ages. So right now, if someone says Shakespeare to you, the first play or like the play that you're gonna think of is Hamlet. And King Lear is obviously a very good play. Everybody likes it. There's a great philosophy and poetry in there, but the real big one that if you want to be a smart person you need to be able to talk about, that is Hamlet. There have been times in the past that were Lear ages where King Lear was like the Shakespeare play and Hamlet was all just a very good play. I think we're shifting. We're going to shift into a Lear age soonish. They're both obviously very big, very complex plays. The real difference between them is that King Lear is about your relationship with other people and Hamlet is about your relationship with yourself. So I think if you look at, what are Hamlet ages and what are Lear ages, you may also find a correlation between when are people more trying to figure out their relationship with themselves and when are they more trying to figure out their relationships with other people. Another interesting thing about those two plays is that they both have wildly different manuscripts, or not wildly different manuscripts, but they have multiple manuscripts which vary to a greater extent than the typical manuscripts. So for some of Shakespeare's plays we only have one edition of, mostly from the first folio. Some plays we have a folio edition and a quarto edition. And usually there's like a couple small changes. Sometimes it's just a word here and there, sometimes it's a line is added or deleted or given to a different character. The changes between the quarto and folio versions of both King Lear and Hamlet do make, not substantially different, I'm trying to find exactly the right adverb, noticeably different and effectively different plays. And Hamlet, of course, also has the bad quarto, which most people don't reference, but is also something interesting to think about. So with this in mind, I'm going to take the same approach to Hamlet as I took with King Lear in the King Lear Bard Book Club video, which is like there's so much to talk about that I cannot possibly. So I'm gonna pick a couple of themes and sort of explain what they're doing in the play and look at some specific examples of how they are affecting in the play, of how they're being enacted in the play, and then sort of let you take that and run with it, because Hamlet is really big on questions and not really big on answers. And I think that's why it's, people never get tired of it. There are endless ways to produce Hamlet, to endless different effects, much more than, Much Ado About Nothing. I do ask for a wee bit of your indulgence before I get into those themes, because there's two things that I want to say that don't really fit into the themes, but are still really nice to know. The first one just utterly breaks my heart. So this is not like a solid confirmed fact. This is a bit of theatrical tradition, theatrical traditional knowledge. And that is that Shakespeare, in addition to writing the plays for this company, also acted in them. And there's two roles that we kind of think that Shakespeare took himself. One of them is Adam in As You Like It, and the other one is the ghost in Hamlet. So if I ever had like my one trip in a time machine, I would definitely, and I wasn't allowed to use it to kill Hitler and be a good person or something, I would use it to go back and watch real Will Shakespeare play the ghost. I would cry so much. Gah. And the other one, I just want to sort of briefly reference the world of scholarship, which is what I'm going to call like the Hamlet nitpicking world of scholarship. So this is a complicated play, and there's probably some like typographical errors, and there's the differences between the things, and writing a play is hard. So there's some things in this play that don't make sense. And I'm just going to talk about one of them, so I can acknowledge that this sort of thing exists, but we don't have to talk about every single one of them, because that's not the point. That's not the point. So in Act 1, I'd like to draw your attention to some Act 1, Scene 1, I'd like to draw your attention to some inaccurate time flow. When the guards first encounter each other and are asking each other what time it is, one of them says, "'Tis now struck 1." Within that scene, which takes max 10 minutes to perform, at the end of the scene when the ghost leaves because the cock is crowing and the sun is rising. We are in Denmark, which is very far north, and they're also saying that it's very cold, so we know we're in Denmark in the winter. No way is the sun rising before like 8 o'clock in Denmark, and so apparently 7 hours at least went past during this 10-minute scene. That don't make no sense. Okay, enough of that. Let's do some actual interesting and thoughtful analysis of the text. There is actually another thing that I want to explain before we get into the themey stuff. And that is the plot versus the story of Hamlet. So the plot is pretty easy to understand because it's, presented in front of you. The story is more complicated because normally a lot of the story of Hamlet is reported. So you don't actually get to see it, you just hear other people talking about it. And since Shakespearean English is difficult to understand, a lot of times when people are just like talking about characters and events that we don't know anything about, your brain just turns off. So I do want to make sure that people understand the story of Hamlet. And also, if you go see it on stage or in most films, they are aware that long speeches about people and characters that we haven't seen bore the audience, and so a lot of times this gets cut or glossed over. So the plot of Hamlet occurs within the story of Hamlet. The story of Hamlet is the story of a political and military conflict between Norway and Denmark. Basically what's going on there is before this play begins, many years before this play begins, old King Hamlet killed old King Fortinbras, who was the king of Norway, in battle. When the old king died, the throne went to his brother, similar between old Hamlet and Claudius, even though old King Fortinbras did have a son whose name was also Fortinbras. Sorry that this is confusing. So the current king of Norway is the uncle of Fortinbras. He is infirm and bedridden and not doing a lot. Young Fortinbras wants to avenge his father's death. And he is planning to invade Denmark. And so in Act 1, Scene 2, Claudius sends Cornelius and Voltimand to the king of Norway to let him know that Fortinbras is planning this attack on Denmark, because the king of Norway is against the invasion of Denmark. He thinks it's a bad idea. He is not going to sanction it. So this happens, and then very briefly, there's like a little tiny thing in Act 2 where Cornelius and Voltimand come back, and they say, yes, we talked to the king of Norway. He told Fortinbras, don't do that. Instead, Fortinbras is going to take this big army he's amassed to attack Denmark and instead attack Poland. Yeah, that totally happens, because at the end, that was sarcasm. I don't know if I effectively conveyed that was sarcasm. At the end of Act 5, the very end of the play, Fortinbras is in fact there with all of his army, and he's like ready to invade. So the plot, the story of Hamlet is Fortinbras wants to avenge his father and invade Denmark. When he gets there, he discovers that the entire court and anyone of royal blood in Denmark is dead, and so he can become king of Denmark. And he gets to live happily ever after. Now, the plot of Hamlet the story sort of trips over its own shoelaces and gets caught up in the plot of Hamlet, which is the story of how the entire royal family of Denmark ended up dead, which is because Hamlet sees his dad's ghost and then has to kill his uncle, but he's not good at killing his uncle, and so other people die in the meantime, and it's a whole bloody mess. Okay, so now that we've got that covered, we can move on to greener pastures, bigger fields. And I want to talk about acting in Hamlet, spying in Hamlet, and sexism in Hamlet. These three all have quite a bit of overlap. This is a very highly integrated play. The themes are all quite integrated. It's not like we have one scene where we address this sort of idea and one scene where we address this sort of idea. It's all doing everything all of the time, so I'm going to try to keep these separate, but I will fail. So, acting. In English, acting has two senses that we're going to worry about here. One is performing, and since this is a play, we can never forget that there's some sort of meta theater going on anytime we talk about acting in the sense of performing, because all of this is being performed. And there's also acting in the sense of taking action, is doing something. And Hamlet, the character, and therefore also Hamlet, the play, is really interested in the implications that each of these things has on the other. So if I was directing a production of Hamlet, I'm available in case anyone needs that. I have no experience. I think that the sort of main issue I would want my Hamlet to focus on is how can I take the action of revenge when all action is performance, which means I'm not actually doing revenge, I'm performing revenge, and that's not good enough. So this idea gets introduced really early in Act 1, Scene 2, when the king and the queen have dealt with the sort of political business of the court with the whole Norway situation, and they turn their attention to Hamlet, who is probably sticking out like a sore thumb because he is dressed in mourning colors. And Gertrude basically asks Hamlet, why does he seem so sad? And he responds with, seems, madam, nay, it is, I know not, seems, 'tis not alone my inky cloak, my blah, 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 all of these other physical manifestations of grief, that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passes show. So Hamlet is admitting here that everything that he is doing is something that could be done as a performance. And the only way that he can know that it's not a performance is from some sort of internal verification. And he kind of has to acknowledge that nobody else can experience his internal verification. They can only see, the shows which could be performed. And this is probably not the first time Hamlet has thought about this situation, although it may be the first time that it's really like struck home with its implications on, you know, his own behavior and how he needs to conduct himself in order to convey, I don't know, in order to interact with the world. Because Hamlet is really interested in theater. He seems to know the players that come to Elsinore personally. He remembers performances that they've done, and he sort of writes his own elements to a play. He doesn't write the Mousetrap in its entirety, which is the play that the players perform, but he adds some lines to make it more specific to Claudius's situation in order to catch out Claudius. And there's this super great and famous scene, although like a lot of the scenes in Hamlet are super famous, where Hamlet directs the players to do a good job with their performance. He says, "Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, wah, as many of our players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines." So he's saying, don't just yell the lines. Do them good. Do them real. Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand, but thus use all gently, for in the very torrent, tempest, and as I may say, whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. And he goes on, but he's basically saying, like, don't act like you're acting, act like you're being real. Act like it's real. Do some like a Stanislavski method, please. And so this is sort of an interesting moment in theatrical history, or an interesting commentary on theatrical history, because medieval theater, this sort of style that came before Shakespeare, was very, you know, sawing the air too much with your hand and speaking like the town crier. It was very performative. You were not attempting to be realistic. You were attempting to maybe even like remove yourself from realism, because most stories were biblical stories. So you wanted to make them seem bigger and more impressive than real life, whereas in Shakespeare's day, they're much more interested in realistic representations of real life. And of course, we, the audience, know that Hamlet has an ulterior motive, which is that the more realistic these performances are, the better chance he has of getting a reaction from Claudius. So he wants the acting on the stage to be good, to cause an action from Claudius that he will be able to see, because he doesn't have this sort of inner knowledge that Claudius has of himself. He needs Claudius to show something, to wear his guilt on the outside like Hamlet wears his inky cloak, so that Hamlet can confirm that the ghost is telling the truth. And there is sort of a sub-point to this, with a specific metaphor which is brought up once immediately before the mousetrap and once immediately after the mousetrap, and that's this pipe metaphor. So in Act 3, Scene 2, the play within a play scene, you also have this just really nice speech that Hamlet delivers to Horatio that says, hey, I'm glad you're my friend. You're a good guy. And sometimes it gets cut, and that it makes me sad, because I love Horatio. He's a great dude. He's just a normal guy. Like, he's not part of the court. He's not royalty. He just, like, is a university student who sort of wanders into this whole mess, and he's like, oh man, I'm just trying to be chill and cool. And Hamlet is like, hey man, you are totally chill and cool. So he says all of these, nice things about Horatio. Blessed are those whose blood and judgment are so well commingled that they are not a pipe for fortune's finger to sound what stop she please. So with the performance on a pipe, you have this performative aspect, and you also have a pun on the word play. Shakespeare doesn't actually use the word play here, but we should definitely be thinking it, because that's what he's talking about. So you can play a role, or you can play an instrument. And Hamlet is saying that Horatio is not able to be played. Horatio has this balance of passion and reason that means that he can't have his emotions manipulated by events. So he says this about Horatio, and then later in the scene, it's a very long scene, After the play within play, after Claudius has exited, Hamlet gets into a fight with his other friends. So Horatio is like his university friend, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are his like middle school friends, who he has given up on because they're spying on him. More about spying in a bit. And here, the pipe comes back. Hamlet actually asks is it the players? Yeah, one of the players for a recorder, which is a sort of pipe that, do people know what recorders are? I had to play them in elementary school, but I don't know how common that is. It's like a flute, but you play it forward, not to the side. Hamlet takes this recorder and says to Guildenstern, will you play upon this pipe? He says, my lord, I cannot. I pray you, believe me, I cannot. I do beseech you. I know no touch of it, my lord. And Hamlet says, it is as easy as lying. Govern these ventages with your fingers and thumb, and give it breath with your mouth, and it will discourse most eloquent music. Look you, these are the stops. But these cannot I command to any utterance of harmony. I have not the skill, says Guildenstern. Hamlet responds, why, look you now how unworthy a thing you make of me. You would play upon me. You would seem to know my stops. You would pluck out the heart of my mystery. You would sound me from my lowest note to the top of my compass. And there is much music, excellent voice in this little organ, and yet you cannot make it speak. Sblood, do you think I am easier to be played on than a pipe? Call me what instrument you will, though you can fret me, you cannot play upon me. So in the first speech, Hamlet was saying that Horatio cannot be played by fortune. In this speech, he's saying that he himself cannot be played by another person, sort of made to say what the other person wants him to say. We could sort of interpret this as not being true. Hamlet had praised Horatio for mingling passion and judgment. Here, I think Hamlet is letting his passion get the better of him. He's just yelling at Guildenstern. He's pretty clearly giving it away that he knows that Guildenstern is spying on him. And this is one of the many things that gets rolled into Hamlet being sent to England with orders for his execution. So since we mentioned some spying, let's move on to that whole side of this play. This is a more popular angle being taken by modern productions, where you're really showing Denmark as like a security state or even a police state where there's like spy cameras everywhere. If you're doing a modern production. The most recent production of Hamlet that I have seen, when they did the ghost scene, they didn't have the ghost actually appear on the stage, at least for the first time he appears, but we were in a security room with a bunch of TV screens showing, different parts of the castle, and we could see the ghost in the screens. And a lot of the sort of elements related to the spying aspect of the play are focused around the character of Polonius. Certainly lots of other people get involved, but Polonius, his storyline and actions are most wrapped up in this sort of spying element. He's the first person who really clearly tells us what's going on. When Laertes is leaving to go to Paris, Polonius is sort of friendly and giving advice about how to do stuff, how to be a good person, neither a borrower nor a lender be. Right at the beginning of Act 2, when Laertes has left, we see a scene with Polonius and a servant where he says, hey, go spy on my son, I don't trust him. And this whole side of Polonius is, or at least can be, a little bit confusing, because on the one hand, Polonius seems dumb. He's definitely one of those slow-witted old man characters. He's bumbling. Hamlet totally plays him like a flute, is I guess the metaphor that's stuck in my head now, in the words speech, where we first see Hamlet pretending to be insane, performing his insanity, and he sort of messes with Polonius. Polonius gets totally flummoxed by what Hamlet is saying. So we've got this dim-witted side of Polonius, but also we've got this eyes everywhere sort of Polonius. And some productions will lean on one, some productions will lean on the other, generally by cutting some lines or recontextualizing some lines based on what's meant to be considered sarcastic and what's meant to be considered straight. In some cases, the bumbling old fool can be a performance that Polonius is putting on in order to distract us from Polonius, master intelligencer. And possibly you could do it the other way, where like he's a bumbling old fool who's trying, to be cool, and sometimes he just lucks into it. So we've got Polonius directing Ronaldo to spy on his son. We've got Polonius eavesdropping on the to be or not to be speech and the following scene with Ophelia. And we have Polonius getting murdered for spying. So yeah, I guess there's your moral there. Don't convey yourselves behind the arras, you will get stabbed. And as I said would happen, this whole element of spying is also tied into this element of performance, not from the actor's point of view, but from the audience's point of view. Because when you are spying, you are making yourself an audience. You are not participating in something most of the time, but you are, or at least when we're talking about spying, is eavesdropping, which is most of the spying here. You are not making yourself an actor in the performance, you are making yourself an audience, and thus making of the people who are actually doing the interactions, you are making of them performers. And so this whole who is the audience thing in Hamlet is really complicated. There's often like multiple levels of audiencing going on. Obviously there's like the real audience who have paid for tickets in a theater. Then there's the audience, all of the cast except for the players are audience members to the play The Mousetrap. There's audiences in terms of spying. And so some things are getting seen from all of these different angles. But some parts of the play are not getting seen. Some parts of the play are not performed to us, they are reported to us. This is not uncommon in Shakespeare. He doesn't try to show every important thing on the stage, sometimes because it's like a giant battle with lots of people and that would be hard, but sometimes he does it for thematic effect, or because he thinks he can write some really nice poetry about it. But I think, and maybe it's just because it's super long, but I think Hamlet has more key events that are reported to us, where we get the narration of what happened from somebody else. And because there's so much performance and spying going on in Hamlet, these reported events are extra untrustworthy. Normally we're meant to take at face value reported events from other characters. We are suspending our disbelief, specifically meaning suspending our skepticism about what we would normally feel about people just telling us a random story. And because it's a play, we accept that what is being told to us is true because, we need to get the information about the play. And unless we have some good reason to think it's a lie, we shouldn't think it's a lie. You got to throw that out with Hamlet. So there's a lot of really important moments to the plot and also to the story that are reported. So we have the death of Old Hamlet. We don't get to see it. The ghost tells us about it. And sort of the whole point of the play is that Hamlet is suspicious of this. We have Fortinbras amassing an army. We don't see that. Horatio tells us about it. We do see it later, but it takes 4 acts for us to see it. Hamlet appearing to Ophelia. So the first time we see Hamlet being mad is when he's with Polonius. But before we see him with Polonius, Ophelia goes to Polonius and tells him that she saw Hamlet being mad. She saw him with his socks untied and his shirt unbuttoned going "Ugh." Sorry, I just stuck my hand right in your face. And so what the heck are we supposed to do with that scene? If you didn't see my To Be or Not To Be video, you should go watch that because a lot of that is about how we have no idea how to contextualize this scene, which gives us a lot of problems for how to contextualize the Hamlet-Ophelia relationship. So lots of possibilities there. One, Ophelia is literally telling us the truth about what she saw and Hamlet was performing. I don't think we're meant to believe that Hamlet actually was insane and Ophelia is reporting the truth. Although actually, now that I've said it, maybe that's also true. Since we are getting this play so much from Hamlet's perspective, it is not crazy, although I would say it is not the easiest, to interpret Hamlet as being actually insane instead of performing insanity. Maybe Ophelia is telling this to Polonius as she actually experienced it. Maybe she's embellishing for reasons no one knows what those reasons would be. Maybe she and Hamlet have agreed to tell Polonius this to get to Polonius to think that Hamlet is insane, but Ophelia knows he's not. What does that mean for how we interpret Act 3, Scene 1? Is she still in on it? Does she think, oh, now it's real? Nobody knows. It's whatever you want, directors. Have fun. Then, probably the most famous one is the death of Ophelia. There's, oh my god, so much ink has been spilled about, like, why didn't Gertrude help Ophelia? What's going on? Is this all a lie? Is Ophelia really dead? We see her body later, so unless she has a twin, Ophelia is really dead. This is Shakespeare, so, not saying definitely not, but probably not. And in that case, the twin is dead, so that's still sad. So Ophelia, her death is reported to us by Gertrude, and then Hamlet's escape from the pirate ship, or from the ship that was taking him to England. These are all like really important parts of the story, and we don't get to see them. We just have to trust somebody else. Don't trust somebody else. And since I've been talking about Hamlet's relationship with Ophelia, I guess now I will pivot over to the sexism. Super fun. In most readings of the text, Hamlet is sexist. It is possible to read him as not, but you gotta really work it and recontextualize some things or assume that something is a lie or a performance, and it's hard. So let's just go with the Hamlet sexist reading. Hamlet the character, definitely sexist. Hamlet the play, maybe sexist. So I would say Hamlet the play, also sexist. Does that mean that Shakespeare is sexist? Not clear. This play is really, it's continually validating Hamlet's point of view in all elements, not just in the sexism. Unlike King Lear, where not so much in the Gloucester plotline, but definitely in the Lear plotline, you have characters devalidating, unvalidating, whatever that word is, each other's point of view, and you get to see multiple sides of an issue. In Hamlet, you only see Hamlet's perspective. And I think that's a viable option for this sort of play, which is about, viewing things and is about performance. This play, it's almost like it's being produced for us by Hamlet. At the end of most Shakespeare plays, or at least the tragedies, you have some notion that the character's going to leave the stage and then talk about what has happened. In some cases, recapitulate what has happened. And in Hamlet, the two characters who get to do this are Horatio and Fortinbras. Hamlet says of Fortinbras, he has my dying voice, which literally in this case means he has my support for the throne. But it can also, we can interpret it metaphorically, meaning I give my voice unto Fortinbras. And he also asks Horatio to tell his story. So the story that's being told is Hamlet's story and Hamlet's voice. Those things are both involved. So even though I would call this text sexist because it is validating the view of a sexist protagonist, that's the sort of sexism that's presented here is really at odds with other things that Shakespeare has written, like Merchant of Venice, Love's Labour's Lost, to a certain extent even Merry Wives of Windsor, which is all about ladies winning. So the specific sexist attitude that's going on here is a view of women as sexual temptations and as overly desirable or overly desirous. Ophelia is more in the temptation and Gertrude is more in the desirous camp. And there's actually a really surprisingly large amount of discussion of makeup in this play. So I'm not an expert on Elizabethan cosmetics, but a lot of, although men certainly did wear makeup, it's, at least based on this play, it appears to be more associated with women and with actors. In Act 3, Scene 1, after the to be or not to be speech, when Hamlet is doing his whole get thee to a nunnery scene with Ophelia, he goes on a whole tirade about makeup. So he says, I have heard of your paintings too, painting the face, well enough. God hath given you one face, and you make yourselves another. And then he expands beyond makeup to say, you jig, you amble, and you lisp. You nickname God's creatures, and make your wantedness your ignorance. Go to, I'll no more on't, it hath made me mad. So his problem with makeup is that it's unnatural, it's artificial, it's against God's will. I feel like an evangelical YouTuber right now. And so it's sort of a performance. It's fake, it's unnatural. Contrast this to when Hamlet was talking about the player and how the player is able to do a performance, and it is moving and powerful and brings Hamlet to tears, and it's so good. When men take action, that's fine. When women take action or do a performance, that's a problem. And then, as I said, the problem with Gertrude is not that she causes desire in others. You can definitely, it's definitely, not sure if it's even coded. If it's subtext, it might just be text. Hamlet saying that he's mad at Ophelia because he finds her attractive, because she turns him on. With Gertrude, the problem is that she is creating desire in herself. And Hamlet describes this in a frankly disgusting way when he does his confrontation with his mother, saying, in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty. That's how he describes Claudius and Gertrude's sex. And he goes on with, you cannot call it love, for at your age, the heyday in the blood is tame, it's humble, and waits upon the judgment. So let's just add a little bonus ageism on top of our sexism. And he implies that not only does her sexual desire make her bad or gross, but also makes her weak. He says, not this by no means that I bid you do. Let the bloat king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him for a pair of reechy kisses or paddling in your neck with his damned fingers make you matter all this rabble out, that I essentially am not in madness but mad in craft. So he thinks that this desire will make her more likely to betray Hamlet. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, as well as in the To Be or Not To Be video, with Ophelia, it's kind of complicated to know what's going on there because we don't know what's real and what's a lie. But with this one, like the play is confirming what Hamlet does. Like, we do actually have to be worried about Gertrude letting a pair of reechy kisses make her spill the beans. She does actually need Hamlet to say this to her in order for her to have her transformation to where at the end she is presumably willing to sacrifice herself to save Hamlet. Scholars disagree on whether Gertrude knows that the drink is poisoned or not. And then tying the sexism thing together with the spying thing, because it is all connected. The fact, like, women's sexuality is, at least in part, a cause for the spying and the paranoia. So Hamlet not only has to worry about dealing with his uncle in this whole revenge plot, but he also has to worry about his mother because she's sleeping with his uncle. Polonius, when he sends Rinaldo to spy on Laertes, one of the things he wants Rinaldo to pay attention to is whether or not Laertes is drabbing, which means visiting whorehouses, and oh god, this is so gross. And this scene, after the To Be or Not To Be speech, the Get Thee to a Nunnery scene between Hamlet and Ophelia, is witnessed by Claudius and Polonius, and they sort of set it up. They introduce Ophelia into the scene because they think that, you know, her presence and the existence of her sexuality will get Hamlet to reveal something. And then, of course, in the end, like, sexuality does drive Ophelia insane. The most explicit reason for Ophelia's insanity is the death of her father. However, her insanity manifests itself by singing really dirty songs. It's all just like, oh god, really? I still like this play, though. Sometimes you have to sit with the grossness because the world is gross. I think that is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Next month, we start the first tetralogy. So we're gonna be doing Henry VI, Part 1. Heads up, this play is not as good as Hamlet. My advice for reading the Henry VI plays is to open up the Wikipedia page for each play while you're reading it, because it will have a list of characters and tell you which character is who. This is a thing that is very difficult to follow in the Henry VI plays. Shakespeare was not that good at writing when he wrote them. There's too many characters, they're doing too many things. I wish you the best of luck when you read them. I will do a recap at the beginning of that video to explain what exactly happened in case you didn't quite follow all of it. Yeah, so I'll see you then, and also in the meantime with other videos. Bye!